All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks again for being here tonight. And we want to introduce our fabulous guest speaker, John Amdor, who's our lobbyist who we've worked with for many years now, maybe at least 5. And yeah, we've got some prepared questions, as Julia said, so we'll kick it off. Just with 3 or 4 questions, and then again, we want to open it up to all of you. So to get started, John, could you tell us just a little bit, maybe starting off with your background, how did you get into lobbying, and what exactly does that mean to be a lobbyist? So I'll let you kick it off.
Sure. Well, thanks, Maggie, and good evening, everybody. It's great to be with you and really appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit. And so my name's John Amdor with the Neckarts Amdor Anderson Group. It's the name of our company. We have, like Maggie said, the great privilege to represent Active Transportation Alliance in Springfield, lobbying state government, and have been doing that since 2018. Active Trans was actually one of the first clients that we were fortunate enough to sign up. My 2 business partners, Elaine Neckrits and Steve Anderson, are both former members of the Illinois House. I worked for Elaine for her last 4.5 years in office until in 2018 she decided to take a step out of public life, but wanted to remain kind of involved in the work in Springfield. And so we started lobbying. Before that, I kind of grew up in and around politics and government. Spent a lot of time working on campaigns, both here in Chicago and around the country. But was always really focused on eventually getting more into the government side of things, and found that I think when I sort of started out my career, kind of figured I'd be mostly working, officially in government the whole time. But along the way, once I kind of learned a little bit more about what it means to be a lobbyist in Springfield, have really found that to be an area that I really enjoy and get a lot of satisfaction out of. I probably not every mother's dream for their child to grow up and be a lobbyist. Not exactly a beloved field, but we pride ourselves, I think, on trying to be some of the good guys, working on issues that we feel serve a public good and align with our personal values. And as somebody who's been biking and walking and riding transit in Chicago for the 20 years that I've lived here, I've long been a member and supporter of Active Trans, and it's been great to be part of the work with them over the last few years. Hopefully that's a good starting place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing some kind of personal and professional background. That's all really interesting. And of course, we really appreciate you being a member and being like personally dedicated and bought into the work, as well as, dedicating your hardworking hours towards it too. So I guess to kind of dive more into the campaigns or wins that you've been involved in, could you share some key lessons learned from successful campaigns, and kind of what's been the recipe for a successful bill campaign?
Yeah, I think probably the 2 largest efforts that I've been able to be a part of over the last few years. One was CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which passed, is it about 2.5 years ago at this point, which was kind of the culmination of several years of organizing and policy development and negotiating. And then the second one that kind of was happening along the same was the passage of the Safety Act, and specifically the Pretrial Fairness Act, which ended the use of cash bail in Illinois. So both of those were really big campaigns that had their genesis many years before anybody ever put pen to paper. crafting a bill to pass. But I think where they had a lot of similarities is, a really effective use of what I call inside game and outside game. And, that is where you have folks on the ground in Springfield every day who are really singularly focused on, passing the bill, engaging in the negotiations, working through kind of all alongside the policy experts on sort of the wonky details. But then along with that, both a really talented and focused comms teams that help work to shape, whether it's paid media or earned media through the sort of traditional outlets, or in creating compelling social media. And then finally, like real boots on the ground organizers, folks who, whether it was knocking on doors or organizing or attending town hall meetings with legislators and other elected officials. But those, those are ones where it's really hard work, and it's work I think that no one organization or can really be as successful of. Those are both both CJA and the Pretrial Fairness Act efforts that were done as part of broad coalitions, and I think that is a really key point to have as much diversity of background and viewpoints on a particular issue, to be able to effectively communicate to all the different types of legislators that you need to get to get to 60 votes in the House and 30 votes in the Senate and the governor's signature to pass a bill into law. And I think Illinois, one of our great strengths is in the diversity of both people and their economic and ethnic and racial backgrounds, and the different types of communities that people are able to choose to live in this state, from the small rural farmers up to one of the biggest cities in the country. And it's to have the most success and to pass things that really do impact everybody in the state's life one way or the other. It's important to do as much as you can to organize in different types of communities and make sure that the priorities of different groups of people are reflected in the final outcome. And that's something I think we were able to successfully do in those two examples.
Great. Yeah, no, that's I think what the part of the strategy with, the greenhouse gas bill, the transit bill, is that coalition idea. So it's definitely it's an interesting process to think about all the different angles too of a bill, to how it impacts people in different ways, and try to figure out how to get many different types of people on board to the same idea. So I guess before we talk more about the the bills that we're focused on, we were also just curious about just general tips you have for advocates, where how can we all be making a difference in Springfield, and then how, do you have any tips for just talking to elected officials, meeting with them, any recommendations? We'd love to hear.
Yeah, I guess, my sort of stock go-to line is that when it comes to state legislators, I don't think I would call them normal people, but by and large, they are pretty ordinary people. And what I mean by that is that their state legislators are a lot more accessible than I think a lot of folks imagine. And it's not universally true. I think, particularly with more senior legislators, if your representative is the speaker or the president of the Senate, it can be more challenging, but not impossible to actually just call up their office and get a meeting with them. I would have a hard time thinking of somebody offhand who I know just has that I know is really hard to for a constituent to get time with. So I think that is, it really is as simple as reaching out to them and asking for some time to come and just talk about your issues. And it's best, it is best if there's a bill that you want to discuss with them, but it's not essential. And I think if all you what it really comes down to is about building a relationship with your legislator. And the way to do that is not sort of viewing it as sort of a one-off thing where you have one meeting and then kind of expect them to just go off and do the right thing all the time. It's important to it really valuable outcome is, and one again I think a thing a lot of people don't realize is that legislators they do hear from a lot of people. They get a lot of information thrown at them, but most of them, again, they are particularly responsive when they've got groups of constituents coming to them and talking about issues, priorities. And given the time with a lot of folks, you can build up a relationship so that you become, when it comes to an issue, you can become the person that a legislator thinks about when they have when something comes across their plate. I know when Elaine, my partner, was in the legislature, there were any number of people, because you have all sorts of bills that come across and you say, oh, I don't know anything about adoption law, but I know I have a constituent who's practices adoption law and has a lot of expertise in it, so I'm going to call her up and see what she has to think. And the figuring out, finding a way to sort of fill that gap and becoming a bike person, or that a legislator thinks of, or a transit or pedestrian person, like that is a great way to do it with, be able to have that influence that just kind of grows over time, because you're somebody who has taken the trouble to dial up your legislator and make sure they understand that they've got constituents who care about a particular issue, and they can get to a point where they'll seek you out to get your take on an issue or a piece of legislation.
John, what do you think about like emails, action alerts, witness slips, like those types of ways also to take action? Like, is that effective, or like it sounds like meeting people is maybe the ideal, but what about other?
Yeah, I think, if there's a pyramid of like effectiveness, yeah, an in-person meeting is at the top, followed by a phone call, or maybe followed by a Zoom and then followed by a phone call. When it comes to emails, the action alert emails are definitely useful. I think it is best if when you're presented with the template, if you can kind of personalize it a bit. I think legislators, when they see 10 or 15 or however many emails coming in, they'll take note of the volume, but having having a bit more of a personal touch to it, or even if you see an action alert and rather than maybe this isn't the best thing to say, but just sending an email directly to them to get if you're able to get their email address, those personalized ones stand out a lot more than sort of the larger blast ones, which are still, if you're not going to do anything else, doing that is a great thing to do. Witness slips, I'm not the world's biggest fan of witness slips. I think it's something that again, if all that you ever have the capacity to do is put in some information into a web form, you're much better off sending an email to your legislator than you are filling out a witness slip, particularly on issues when hundreds of people are filling out witness slips. Like, there's no guarantee your legislator is even sits on that committee or will be in the room when and certainly if there's lots of them, they don't read them all off, and don't read where that person comes from. So you're really just going to be kind of buried in a crush. Yeah, all that to say that the more personalized that you can make it, the better.
Great. Yeah. And we have a question in the chat. How can ATA reach and influence legislators who aren't local to Cook County? Convincing folks in the exurban regions will be more difficult, it seems to me. And then one pro tip from Austin Bush, use ChatGPT to quickly personalize an email. I will caveat that and say sometimes you can kind of tell it's a bit robotic language, but still good to fall back on when you can. So sorry, John, that question, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that a great thing, having worked with ATA for a few years, is there are members in the collar counties, probably fewer as we get further out and outside the immediate Chicago region. But where I think that growing the membership base in that area is important. I think we know that there are people who care about the mission of ATA in all sorts of communities, and that along with that there are really cool things happening in municipalities and localities across the state that you might not typically think of as places that would adopt policies that to make them more bike ped friendly or to enhance transit access. But the thing is that it is, and that those are things that those communities are finding value in, and that there's people who want those. So, again, it gets down to kind of the basic grassroots organizing of seeking out the places. So if you read about a proposed bike lane in DeKalb or something like that, driving folks to a public meeting about that, just going to it and meeting other folks local to the area who are interested and talking to them and trying to get them signed up and involved and encourage them to not only contact their legislator or their elected officials, but say, while you're doing that, find 5 friends and ask all of them to take action as well. That those are just kind of the tried and true organizing tactics that help build bigger movements when you don't have all the money in the world to kind of do it through that way.
Great, thanks. And, keep the questions coming in the chat, folks. We have a few more prepared questions for you in the meantime. So what are some of the biggest barriers we're facing to progressing our main 2 policy priorities at the state level? So kind of saving transit and the greenhouse gas work. Yeah, what are some of the barriers to getting those goals implemented?
I would say I think a big problem with those is kind of our fractured governance system generally. That I think that we lose a lot of ability to envision to get the policies that we want to see. Whether it's road diets or better trends like that. I think because unfortunately, I don't think that government is as responsive to the public as we'd like it to be, and I think a big function of that is that just sort of the very fragmented systems of authority where whether it's in the city of Chicago when you're thinking like, oh, we'd love to have a bike lane here, but it stops at the end of this ward line because that older person doesn't want bike lanes in their communities, or we'd love to have more coordination between CTA and Metra, but CTA is worried if they help out Metra, then it'll cannibalize CTA ridership or vice versa. So I do, and I think similarly from some of the other interest groups, particularly the ones whether it's folks who build roads, that a lot of them have a vested interest in continuing investments, prioritizing construction and maintenance of roads because they expect that most people are going to continue to use private automobiles for most trips. And the system is that's the transportation system that the broader that the broader system is set up to deliver. It's just not designed to do other things and provide more options for more trips. And so I think that is why I think, particularly when it comes to the transit bill, governance reform is so central to it, because rather than having a smattering of agencies all doing different flavors of the same thing, moving people around the Chicago region, what we ought to have is a region-wide approach to it that ensures that the most number of people are able to get to the most amount of destinations using public transit.
Thanks for that. Yeah. I'm curious, when it comes to the impact that storytelling can have, for example, maybe one person has to commute via Metro and CTA every day, and then they can use that frustrating experience to speak to the need for a more unified strategy. What other kinds of tips, if somebody doesn't have an example like that, do you have around how people can share personal stories or personal perspective that can make an impact on a legislator who just can't see that kind of human impact yet?
I mean, I think if you don't have a personal story that is that, I mean, I would challenge that. I think everybody's got a story to tell on some level, and so I think that finding ways to build that up, but it is, I think that's why it's great to have a coalition coming together around this, where you can borrow from colleagues who have other issues, and just, again, talk to your legislator about why something is important to you. It sort of the double-edged sword of how state government works really is that, by and large, it's not always the best art, like the most perfectly reasoned argument that wins. It hardly ever is. It is about much more emotional and human connections a lot of the time, and so just being able to tell a story that is compelling and pulls at the right heartstrings, or demonstrates how transit access can support any number of other items. That's where having a relationship and knowing a little bit about your state legislator really comes into play, because when you're talking to them, you don't necessarily just want to sit down with them and read from your bullet points and go through it and be done. Part of building a relationship is asking them questions too, and understanding what led them to seek office, and what they prioritize when they're working on. Because again, not every legislator is going to be an expert on transit. Legislators are generalists, right? And that's why they rely on constituents to influence and guide them on things that they don't have expertise in, or maybe just don't really care about personally, or they turn to their colleagues to say this. I think there are probably, there's really 10 or fewer state legislators that I think are really like dyed in the wool, ride or die transit champs, but they, all of them have relationships with other people in the legislature who just, aren't necessarily hostile to transit, just doesn't really, not something they think about a lot. And so, but that's why once you get to know your legislator a bit, say, oh, so Senator so-and-so, she really cares about, senior health care. Say, well, public transit has a huge nexus to that, or they care about education. Well, all the kids we know that take the CTA around to school and rely on it as a way to to be able to get from home to get an education. If it's workforce development, say, well, we know how much money people spend on driving and owning a car, that providing transit options for those folks can relieve some of that economic pressure on them, and without having to have them necessarily make any more money, they've got a lot more money in their pocket to spend on whatever they choose. So that to me is a big part of what lobbying is right. It's kind of this, I don't want to call it guessing game, but being, just understanding how the puzzle fits together, and knowing how to tailor your arguments to different legislators based on what you know about them, and what they care about.
Great, thanks, John.
Yeah, and I'm curious, those 10 champions you mentioned for transit, that's across both chambers?
Yeah, probably. I mean,
Okay.
and I say, not again, that those are like our real hardcore
Yes.
champs. So
Okay, great. Maggie, were you gonna go to
Oh,
the
yeah,
questions in the
I was
chat?
just gonna go to the questions. There's a few questions lined up here. So first one here from Ralph, he says, at the National Bike Summit last week, one of the bike advocates, now a government employee, suggested that advocates should ask, how can I help? Can you provide some examples of what advocates can do to help a legislator?
yeah, I think it's one of the things that has been done is having like more grassroots level advocates kind of meet with the lobbyists, sort of the more professional folks, and talk to them, and I've had legislators who will say like, you don't have to convince me, you've got to convince my constituent committee, because not all, but a lot of legislators convene different advisory committees, and they say, I like, before I get really involved or take a position on something, you want to run it by. So you could say that, like, well, I could help form your bike ped transit constituent advisory committee, and if you have other folks from the district contact you about this, send them my way, and while you're focused on other things, we can like come up with lists, like whether it's lists of projects that they'd like to see. If you say, well, we know we've got this state road that runs through our district that we'd like to see it have sidewalks along it, or we'd like to see it go down from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, or whatever it is. It's those would be the types of things that immediately come to mind. I'd be interested to talk to that government employee, because I'm not totally sure what that means.
Thanks. And then we have another question, kind of on the similar vein. When trying to connect with a legislator on a personal level, what kinds of things would you recommend as areas for common ground? As in, mention that we both went to the same college around the time, or talking about things related to living in the same area.
Those are perfect things, right? In any of those, like just little, do you have kids? Where'd your kids go to school? Oh, my niece and nephew went there. I wonder if you know them, or simple stuff like hobbies, or music, or movies. Again, I think legislators are, I know, because I'm Facebook friends with enough of them. They see the same movies and listen to the same music and watch the same TV shows as everybody else. So talk, whether if you're a sports fan, talking about sports teams, that it's just the basic stuff like that could go a long way.
John, the committee that different legislators are in, does that indicate, like, if someone's in the transportation committee, are they usually interested in transportation, or not necessarily?
That's a good indication. Yeah, not every legislator gets on every committee that they request to be on, but yeah, that is probably the best public indicator of what a legislator cares about. But you never really know until you ask them, and that could be another thing to to ask about, right? Is like, oh, I see you're on the mental health committee. How did you choose that? And they might say, well, I'm 117th in seniority, and that was the last thing left, so they stuck me on there.
Cool. And then another question from Peggy. On a general level, can you paint a picture of a typical lobby day in Springfield?
Yeah, so it's, when the lobby days, it depends on the group setting it up. I worked with lobby days where it's, small as 5 people up to, a couple hundred people. Typically the bigger ones, it's, you have everybody come down, sort of meet up, break off into groups and start, looking for the legislators. When we've done it through, like with Illinois Environmental Council and the Clean Jobs Coalition, typically most groups will have a professional lobbyist assigned to them for the day, that can help sort of guide them around, look at the legislators on their list, and either set up meetings with them, or more likely, since trying to schedule things on a session day in Springfield is pretty challenging, say, okay, I know Senator so-and-so is going to be in this committee room at 2 o'clock. So we're going to go over there at 1:45, and we're just going to stand outside the room, waiting for her to walk in and grab her for a few minutes there. So it's typically a lot of fairly short conversations, but ones that I think can still be really meaningful, especially so with to just demonstrate to a legislator that you cared enough to take time out of your life to get on a bus or a train and come to Springfield for a day. And then oftentimes, there'll be a rally at some point, or a press conference where different leaders and some, typically some legislators will come and speak and kind of, fire up the crowd, usually either towards the beginning of the day or as sort of a last event before folks hit the road.
Great. And just a heads up, I did I did drop in the chat the May 9th lobby day that our coalition partners are planning. So yeah, Peggy, feel free to go ahead and sign up right now. You can mark that Active Transportation Alliance is the group that you're working with, and there'll be plenty more details to come, as well as trainings and things like that to help you feel prepared. We have another question from Sharon. So, reducing greenhouse gas can be accomplished not just by transitioning to electric cars, but in a dense urban environment with active transit, including e-bikes, and many municipalities are offering a rebate to help accelerate this transition. What is the appetite of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition for an e-bike rebate in Illinois? How do we get them more interested?
It's a great question. There is a lot of interest in it without, speaking. Don't hold me hard and fast for this, but there are certainly members within the Clean Jobs Coalition, including, I think it's fair to say, ATA, that would like to see a form of rebate or other state support to encourage greater e-bike adoption. I think in one, ultimately where it comes down to, I think why it's not at the forefront of the agenda right now is simply a matter of capacity. That we've got the transit cliff facing, and the other components of the transportation agenda, that we really just don't have enough bandwidth to make it a priority right now. I would certainly like to, as a e-bike owner myself. I totally understand, like, the transformational and just how much that opens up to trips that you can make by bike that you might have otherwise had to chosen to drive. I think the other kind of the more political challenge is, I think that there's just the value of e-bikes hasn't quite broken through to the legislature yet. I think a lot of folks don't really understand the different, when you say e-bike, I suspect a substantial number of legislators would probably say like, oh, you mean an electric motorcycle? There was a lot of debate around those in CEJA. So I think that there's some more education that needs to be done. I can say I've been doing a little bit. I brought my e-bike down at the end of session last year and gave a few legislators rides and let them check it out. So I'm going to keep on doing that. And I think I'm hopeful that I should say too, the other thing is, and this is no surprise to anybody who reads the newspaper in Illinois, the state is not we're in a better financial position than we have been in, the last 25 years. It's still not great. And you're hard pressed to to enact legislation that has a fiscal impact on the state without a really compelling story to get it done, and we haven't quite built it up yet, but the work will keep going, and I do think at some point the time will be right to really make it a priority.
Great. Another question here from Noah. He said at an active trans training I attended, I learned that there isn't a reliable way to find a legislator's voting history, or at least we didn't know of one. To what extent does this hinder targeting, outreach efforts to individual legislators, and how much of a difference would it make if this information were more widely available?
Knowing a legislator's voting history, it can be important a lot of the times on active trans issues. It's not terribly valuable as a tool. I don't think. I would say, just more generally speaking, I would love to see more ways to like and to more easily analyze legislators' records and sort of those nuts and bolts pieces of the legislative process. I think can be really valuable and revelatory. But when it comes to active trans, like we don't, you're typically, when we're not able to persuade a legislator to go along with us, it's not because they're like anti our issues, right? Like there are those people certainly exist. I think we all know that, but most folks in the legislature, it really is just a question of priorities. So whether it's like if we've had or with legislators not understanding a bill before them. So I think that I view again, and this is true of the overwhelming majority of legislators, I view just about all of them as gettable on our issues. It's just a matter of them understanding and believe and knowing that they've got people back home that care about the issue and are organized around it. I don't think in the legislature right now we've got like a hardcore anti-bike or anti-transit zealot. Fingers crossed. I don't know. We just had a primary. There's going to be some new folks coming in, so TBD.
Yeah, that conversation came out of when we were doing some role playing for constituent meetings or meetings with electeds. We had the folks role playing as an elected official decide whether they were a proponent, opponent, or neutral. And so that then kind of solicited the question like, hey, how should we find out if they'll be generally supportive before we go into these meetings or not? So any thoughts around kind of doing that legwork or how to do that? Is that really key going into constituent meetings?
I guess, sorry, Julia, didn't quite follow the.
So is it worthwhile to try and investigate and see if your elected official is a previous
Yeah.
supporter of issues like ours.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, so like, one way is, you can look through and there are limitations to this, but you can look through and see if they've co-sponsored bills that deal with our issues, either in this legislative session or in the past. And even, just simply Googling. I think a great benefit of sort of more engagement from active trans and partner groups is that more folks are asking during the electoral process and trying to get legislators on the record on this, and those are things that you don't have to search through 10 years of looking at bills that a legislator co-sponsored. You can look at a questionnaire that they filled out for a primary election within the last couple of years, and I think that's a big one. I think encouraging groups to and I'm not an expert on C3 versus C4, but encouraging groups to engage and provide questionnaires to legislators on those types of things is again just a good way to get folks on the record. And most of if a legislator's gonna bother to fill out a questionnaire talking about bike ped issues, for instance, like the fact that they bother to fill it out at all is a pretty good indication that they're probably sympathetic, at least to the issues. So you can learn a lot just by that.
Yeah, and we have some sample questionnaires if anyone's interested in approaching their lawmaker with one of those to get their input. Another question from Ralph here is, can you talk a bit about working with a legislator's staff? Is there a different approach, especially if the legislator is in a leadership role?
Yeah, I will say the legislative staff they've reconfigured it a bit, I guess is one way to say it, in the few years since I left staff. And for one thing, they've really grown the budget, so it is really helpful that you used to have some legislators who they only had a part-time staffer in their district office and it was could be really challenging to organize time. That they've beefed it up, and a lot of legislators are able to have a little bit more professionalized staff. I think the biggest distinction is to understand, when you're talking to the district staff versus Springfield staff, and when you're talking with the Springfield staff, whether it's their legislative assistant, typically the senators, they all have their own one. In the House, most of them share between 2 or 3 legislators. So you got to make sure you know who you're talking. And then in addition, in Springfield, they've got staff that works for the caucuses and provide that they're the folks who are really more of the like policy experts or attorneys who work on issues. So understanding what kind of staff you're talking to can be really important. And I think most legislators, again, not universally, most of them do their district scheduling through their district offices. And so if you're trying to get a meeting with them, reaching out to that office versus the Springfield office is the better one. If there's a vote coming up and you want to weigh in on that, that's a time when it might make more sense to call the Springfield office. But the district staff, I think, are the folks who you really want to take the time to get to know, because again, they actually live in the community and are probably more familiar with the issue. And I've also found, at least particularly in the city of Chicago and some of the closer in suburbs, most of the staff are younger folks, and an awful lot of them are, regular transit users and cyclists, and they are are very sympathetic to active transgender issues and have been great to kind of like, I've had a couple of meetings where, we'd be sitting down with a legislator and their 20-something district staff, and I know that the staff keeps talking about the issues to the legislators long after we've left the office, just because they care so much. So it can be really helpful, and it can be very influential in their legislators, because legislators don't like to disappoint the folks that they rely on for so much.
Great. Then we have two kind of potentially quick questions in the chat. Peggy asks, are there typical job titles for staff so you know who you are talking to?
Yeah, most legislators, like typically they'll have most have two full-time staff in their district offices, and they'll usually go by like chief of staff or district director, or deputy chief of staff or deputy district director. Legislative correspondent or legislative assistant are the Springfield staff that are largely administrative assistants. And then you'll have the budget or policy analyst or staff counsel are kind of, those are the people who work for the caucuses and are really more the policy experts.
Great. And then related, David asks, are there professional committee staffers for the different committees in each house? I know there are in DC, but don't know if Springfield has similar infrastructure.
Yeah, there are. They're not dedicated just to, like, for instance, the transportation committees. They, typically most of the committees in Springfield will have one or two lawyers and one or two budget and policy folks who might be lawyers, but usually aren't. But then those kind of the pool of the lawyers and budget policy folks are assigned to a bunch of committees. Some of them staff 5 or 6 committees, so they won't be like super deep transportation policy experts, but what they will typically understand is all the bills that have been assigned to their particular committee and where they're coming from on them, and sort of what the pressure points are, who's for it, who's against it. And it can vary a lot. Sometimes you'll get a committee staffer who it's their first legislative session and they're still kind of learning the ropes. Some of them, sometimes you'll get to talk to committee staff who's been there for 6 years and has seen it all.
John, do you ever see, yes, lawmakers kind of like during the life of a bill kind of switch sides? Like they get they're influenced so much by, I don't know what they're hearing, that you hear it like they were, not super supportive of transit initially, but then now are a big champion.
Yeah, there are a few legislators who I think are maybe rely a little too much on whoever the last person they talked to was, and that can really work out in your favor if you get them at the right time, but it can also be frustrating when you feel like you keep having the same conversation over and over and over again. But I honestly, I view it, that's just part of the nature of how it works. And you learn who those legislators are and sort of adjust the amount of attention that you pay to them accordingly.
And I know you mentioned the election briefly, and we, have all been kind of keeping things a little bit on pause until we see how all those chips have fallen. But I'm curious, from your point of view, does it seem like the election will have much of an impact on our issues?
I don't think too much. I looking to the fall election. I don't think Springfield's going to look all that much different a year from now than it does. I think that the partisan and ideological divides are going to be largely the same. And I have been encouraged over the last couple election cycles, and we saw it again with this one, that there are state elected officials who are really putting transportation and our issues like towards the center of their campaign. There was the primary election this year in the 20th Senate District and kind of the Logan Square, Avondale, northwest side area. And, in a lot of ways, the candidates in that race were kind of like falling over each other to see who could be more bike ped friendly. And, you'll love to see that dynamic at play, and hopefully that's something that we can continue to build on. But I think by and large, we'll be in about the same place we are, which is good. We've got a large and growing, a growing at least contingent of folks who really care about the same issues we care about.
I actually, the winner of the 20th district race, Graciela Guzman, I went to college with her. So I was kind of giving her some pointers here and there. So see, folks, these personal connections make all the difference.
John, could you talk a little bit about just the timeline for the transit bill, or like what's expected in the greenhouse gas bill, and kind of what we all should be like preparing for in the next couple of months?
So hopefully towards the end of April, we'll be rolling out a large omnibus clean transportation bill. I think folks probably know this, but the transportation sector in Illinois is the leading sector of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. And so we are going to be proposing kind of a package of really 3 bills, one dealing with setting hard GHG caps from the transportation sector in the state, and require this to take climate into account when making transportation infrastructure decisions. The second is deals with the Northeastern Illinois transit system and the coming budget crunch after the federal stimulus funds run out. But more importantly, I think, or at least as importantly as filling that budget hole, is reforming the governance structure to better deliver service across the region. And then the third part has to do with vehicle electrification. That I'm not as well versed in that third component as I am the other two. But so I think we're going to be rolling those out. It'll be, I think, a pretty big public affair in the next month or so. We're not anticipating any action on any of them probably this spring. But I think probably the most amount of attention, I think, is going to be on the transit component. There's a plan over the summer for lots of legislative hearings and public meetings to discuss the changes that are going to be that we'll be introducing in bill form based on the plan of action for regional transit report that the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning put out late last year. And it's going to really call for bold governance reform and accountability metrics that I think is essential those reforms have to be undertaken in advance of or along with any additional revenue to go into the system, because I just don't believe that state legislators are going to vote for significant new resources for the Chicago area transit system without knowing that they're going to be getting better. The public that's being asked to pay more is going to be will see better service from that. I think that those reforms are critical to building the political will to take the really tough vote of raising more money for the system. So I think then the goal will be to have those discussions to get the public input over the course of the summer and fall, and hopefully have a bill teed up for action in the veto session or lame duck session after the first of the year, before the new General Assembly takes office.
So the bill, there will be a bill number end of April, but then it's like kind of like this, the rest of the session in the summer is like debate and discussion. And then do you imagine that the bill might change a lot by the time?
I would expect it. So, I think we're gonna propose a pretty ambitious restructure, like total overhaul of the RTA and the service boards. We're gonna have really ambitious targets for greenhouse gas reductions and strict new controls over the types of, not necessarily controls, but real metrics for measuring the climate impact of transportation projects. And those are things that are going to be pretty controversial and really, a lot of technical details to both of them, that are going to have to be hashed out. But yeah, our view and the view of our sponsors and the champs in the legislature is that, you've got to start that process somewhere. So start with your ideal and negotiate down from there towards to find the compromise and to get to that 60 votes in the House, 30 votes in the Senate, and a signature from the governor.
And just so I understand, so you're saying that like after the summer, like what is it possible the bill would go into the next January through May, like 2025?
It's possible. I think our hope is that we'll be able to do it earlier than that. But yeah, it's a big enough issue that it may take longer. But I think right now our target is action in January.
Okay, got it.
Early January.
And for folks who might not be familiar, could you explain the veto session or the lame duck session really quick?
Yeah, sorry. So veto session is every year the legislature, the legislature meets from January to May, and then they send hundreds of bills to the governor for action over the summer. The governor can either sign them or veto them, amend it, the main things he does are sign them or veto them. More often than not, he signs them. That, particularly with Governor Pritzker, there have only been a handful of bills vetoed over the last few years. But they do schedule 2 weeks every fall that they call the veto session, that is traditionally designed to, take up any vetoes and either override them or not override them, as the case may be. But they aren't limited to that. They can act on anything in that time. It's called veto session, but functionally speaking, it's just 2 more weeks of regular session. And then lame duck is the same thing. Basically a lame duck session is any meeting of the legislature that takes place after the election, but before the new General Assembly is sworn in. So, there probably won't be a ton of like true lame ducks, but lame duck traditionally refers to an elected official who's announced or that they're leaving office or has lost re-election. I don't think there'll actually be all that many lame ducks in this year's lame ducks session.
Great. Well, I'm just looking at the clock and somehow an hour's flown by. I've been taking lots of notes. So thanks so much for sharing all your expertise. Yeah, any final thoughts, Maggie, or anyone else?
Yeah, no, we really appreciate your time, John, and appreciate all of you advocates who joined this evening. It was very interesting to hear, all of your insights, and we appreciate all the work you're doing on behalf of active transportation and transit in Springfield, John. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'm fortunate enough to be able to do this work, but it is my job is made much easier by having active folks on the ground talking. So thanks for your work and appreciate the time here.
Yeah. All right.
And maybe we'll see you in Springfield on May 9th.
I hope so. Hope I see everybody down there this year.
Yeah.
So look out for John and his dog Cricket, right?
Yes.
All right.
If the weather's nice, I'll bring Cricket to the rally on the
nice.
steps.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you
All right.
all.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.